up out of the flames. I guess Sam didn't like what I'd written about him. He said, I tried writing, but I found I just couldn't do that to other people. I objected, but mildly. I sipped my tea. After he left, I found myself stewing, and then I began a strenuous argument in my head. It boiled down to this. If I'm the only one with the appetite to tell a story, it must belong to me. I do the work. It comes down to my appetite, which in turn comes down to whatever grips my powers of imagination, whatever grips my powers of recognition. That's what makes my little engine purr. I take the facts and expand along lines of thrill, aiming for unreliability, its quivering heart. Of course, here I am assuming my cousin was referring to my writing, but he'd just been talking about his mother, Lydia, telling me various sordid difficulties. He was trying out the thing one tries at one time or another, the experience. That, followed by a dazzled look as his features relaxed and fell away from one another. Why do these loaded, difficult words feel empty? The ones used to label childhood traumas. Whatever. Maybe Sam gave up on writing because he couldn't write about his mother or around her. This I can understand. Our moms are sisters, daughters of the stalwart naval Margaret. My mother, Pearl, is the blonde one, the milkmaid, but built for the 50s. All sleekly muscular curves. Lydia, Sam's mother, was built the same way, but tawny in coloring. Brown irises, surprisingly dark. She has a widow's peak. Raymond, their dad, was a wayward gambler prospector with a gift for abandonment. Dumping his family during the Depression, he ran off for high times with a couple of seriously odd women. More about that later. My mother, Pearl, was born babbling in the nascent Los Angeles of the 1920s. Her accent was dubbed American West by an Italian linguist who studied her in astonishment. I imagine she probably told him she was born in Winnemucca, Nevada. It sounds more appealingly Western than LA. Sun boiling everything down versus coastal haze. When I mentioned Pearl's birth in Winnemucca to Lydia, her brown eyes glared at me in outrage. Pearl, once again, pulling a fast one. Lydia ran off for the birth certificates. They verified her story. Pearl was born in Los Angeles, and Lydia was born in Winnemucca. They had different personal styles. Lydia took the truth hostage, guarding it jealously. Pearl abandoned it on a daily basis. What was at stake? Family reunions were rare but intense. I recall one reunion where our moment of collision gave way to a rolling, obscure fight which lasted 3 days, wet and smothering with too much booze. Lydia's 4 boys versus Pearl's 3 girls. A strange proliferation, all charged up. We didn't argue, we fought. Lots of politics, especially relating to sex. Still, I loved them fiercely, each strange male cousin. Once Sam snipped the butt off a firefly and put it on my finger. Inside a sexual fog. That was the surface. Underneath was the grudge we inherited. Pearl and Lydia's inscrutable calculus of betrayal and loyalty. Lydia didn't remember Raymond. She was a baby when he left. Pearl was older, probably around 7, but didn't remember anything before the age of 16. Pearl's lack of memory was terrifically odd, itself a thing of great plasticity. Out of pure will, she'd substituted imagination for memory. At 15, I was a rapt audience for Pearl's night performances. My attention made out of hard particles of dread and identification. Families are nuclear, and nuclei are smashed together. Do you know the difference between the weak and the strong forces? The strong one is the massive force of the universe, binding quarks of opposite charge. It's only exercised across tiny distances, such as families. Everything else is weakness. I loved the dazzle. Pearl's career as a high diver at the Depression-era fairs, aborted by an exhibition high dive belly flop that left her sinking to the bottom of the pool in a coma. The swim to glory and medals, making the Olympic team the year the games were canceled. Pearl's socialist Jewish father, Raymond, and his movie star friends, who even had movie star animal pals. The opium dens of Winnemucca. History made of such sparkles. The father in this tale even had a violin. Lydia would later insist it was a guitar. The stories disappeared into one poignant pang after another. I couldn't notice how they didn't add up. I was too pleased with being part Jewish and striped with Olympic muscles. It helped me in the neighborhood. Sam remembers Raymond. At least he thinks he might remember him. 25 years after dumping Lydia, Pearl, and my Christian Science grandmother, Mabel Margaret, Raymond rang Lydia's doorbell. Sam was 3, banging a spoon in his high chair. Lydia had invited Raymond to come. It was oddly like dating. Mutual friends had introduced father and daughter to one another. Life is strange on the frontier. Raymond arrived wearing a big Stetson and black lizard skin cowboy boots. His shirt had that swirly piping on it. I imagine it as yellow piping on soft cream-colored rayon. A cowboy shirt with iridescent snaps. Very 50s. Hank Williams Sr. Love that dude, don't you? Anyway, when Lydia told me about this, she handed me a postcard. The Silver Dollar, Winnemucca, Nevada, was written in thick toothpaste script on the cowboy bar interior. Saddles on the wall, spurs. That's Raymond behind the bar, she told me. He looked tall but old, gazing down at the beer he was pulling. Lydia had been a baby when Raymond left. There wasn't money to feed 2 children, so Mabel Margaret sent Pearl to relatives, mean ones, of course, a Chile farming couple who were unhappy to have to share their bread and garden peas with the boisterous little girl whose nickname was Butch. Filled with high-spirited declarations, Pearl always insisted that she refused to see Raymond ever again. She was good at leaving. We all have that survival skill. So, of course, I believed her. In fact, I adopted her attitude. Nasty Pops, you may be dead, but I'm never going to speak to you. Actually, Lydia admitted to me that she had kept Raymond's visit to herself. She hadn't told Pearl that she knew where Raymond lived, or even that he was alive. 3 months after that visit, he was dead. Winnemucca, that's where the family's sense of itself is somehow concentrated. As a place unbelievable, it doesn't cohere. I think I've actually been there, but I don't remember. After the highway signs, hasn't everyone seen them? 347 miles to Winnemucca, 213 miles to Winnemucca, 24 miles to Winnemucca. I got there, drove through, and nothing stuck. I want to go back, but it has to be the 1930s. I want to see the top half of Raymond's face, fleshy, grinning, holding the squirming, laughing baby that resembles my mother. This is the only photograph remaining of Raymond, and it shows only his jaw. The rest were destroyed. But in the one remaining, you can see his reddish skin, a fringe of white blonde hair. He doesn't look Jewish. My mother's eyes are the color of aquamarine. Hopscotching all over the West in his helicopter, Sam ended up spending time in Winnemucca, where he nosed out the old gamblers who had known Raymond. Oh yeah, Raymond, dirty bastard, died owing me $3,000. Sam's legs under the table tilt and amble with the autonomy of length. Sam is a long drink of water. His head droops languidly over his upraised hand as he leans forward, his voice husky with a secret. Have you heard the one about Raymond and Amy? Of course I had, but I had to put it in the magic box along with so many of Pearl's stories, like the one about Pearl hurling herself over ski jumps for cash prizes, the repeating theme with endless variations, poor girl but plucky, poor girl but so lucky. The ski jump story particularly puzzled me. It just didn't square with the character of Pearl, who was not at all relaxed about falling. I didn't exactly not believe it either. I didn't disbelieve any of Pearl's stories. I was incapable of such concrete, restrained opinions. There was some essence shared by every fable told by Pearl, and I believed in that spacious combination of style and unreliability. The narrative gesture, that's what I believed in. It swayed me. I believed in anything that swayed me. Pearl landing in a powdery snow puff, having fallen or flown through hundreds of feet of sparkling air, this image in a repeating loop, with her face appearing, gathering gravity, creamy pink and blonde, and yet with the square jaw oddly butch. Her milkmaid skin etched with a dazzling smile, becoming in the white fog. Becoming what? I was caught in many such puzzles. Of these, Raymond and Amy was possibly the least significant. I'm talking now about Amy Semple McPherson, the first Pentecostal minister of the 20th century, and female. The first woman to cross the United States in an automobile, something she did 14 times with her mother and young son. It was a 1912 Packard touring car with "Jesus is coming soon, get ready," painted on the side in gold. Not an ascetic, a minx, a woman made for worldly love. She drew crowds everywhere, preaching her words of fire in a low, silky voice. There are four major charismata, or gifts of the Spirit, defined by Pentecostalists: glossolalia, speaking in tongues; prophecy, interpretation of tongues; and the gift of healing. In the last, Amy was prodigiously talented. She became a healer of such documented genius that a major church would be built upon it, a church which still stands. Invalids, cripples, the blind and deaf filled the streets by the thousands when she preached. Her ascent began in the early days of Hollywood, and her temple was built there in 1924. She strode the pulpit like a star in robes, her hair pressed to her scalp in rolling blonde waves, her voice palpitating the crowd. On August 7th, 1925, she took up in her palm a field stone and called out in a booming voice, "A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you, and I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh." She was too sexy for God. Rumors swirled around her. She disappeared for weeks and would later cover for these absences by claiming to have been mysteriously kidnapped. Lacerated in court and in the press about these stories, she would only say, "That's my story, boys, and I'm sticking to it." For me, the only odd thing about the story of Raymond and Amy was Pearl's troubled gaze as she told it, as though she found it almost unbelievable. What kind of story would Pearl find unbelievable? This question I could barely pose, let alone answer. It didn't invite inquiry. But that day in my kitchen, Sam told me he had investigated it in Winnemucca. The old gambling buddies of Raymond once again came through with the details. Apparently, Raymond claimed Amy had Beach Boys stashed in towns up and down the coast of California. "Of all these men," Raymond used to brag, "I was the one Amy loved for my mind." A joke rumbled along my synapses, tickled my tongue. "Sam, We come from a long line of sluts of both sexes. But that's pushing it. And it's not even what I meant. I wanted to point to the heart of the story, a quality of perishing, or making another perish for a romantic idea. Those painful yet pleasing sacrifices, a family pattern. Then by the same gesture, we live perpetually in the melancholy aftermath, the empty house. 5 years after Raymond left, Lydia and Pearl stood near as Mabel Margaret sat heavily down at the kitchen table, holding Raymond's first letter. It would contain the divorce papers. Let me see what I'm doing here. Meanwhile, excuse me, this word, ruthless, keeps flickering as I write this, a scorching little flame. Where did it come from? Sam, I want to say right now, you are wrong about me. I'm not ruthless, at least not today. I had to go back to my diary to discover he'd actually called me that. Well, sort of. What I wrote about is a misquote. Sam actually said, I could never be a writer. I'm not ruthless enough. My cousin Sam floats like a butterfly, stings like a bee. Perhaps his words wouldn't sting if they weren't in some part true. Still, it pisses me off, and I'm the writer, so vengeance is mine. Listen to this. Sam, in the midst of his speed addiction, used to claim he'd been invaded by alien space worms. To prove it, he took a match to one of his arm hairs, and before it burnt to the skin, it straightened, pointing up to the heavens. See, Sam would hiss, they're alive. Sigh, a petty gesture making Sam look ridiculous. Is that what you're thinking? You weren't at the table. You weren't floating suspended in my peculiar family history. I remind myself of an oil slick over deep and choppy waters. Comfortable it isn't. Anyway, it occurs to me that by repeating malicious gossip, I'm only spoiling my own case. In this manner, discovering that I have a case and that I want to present it to you, dear reader. Who knew? A little self-sabotage can go a long way. But what could my case possibly be, given that the prospect of verifying any of these family stories is unbearable as well as irritating? I've given up. That's my case. I don't care what the truth is. Not enough to pursue it anyway. I'm registering something more vague, a sort of cloud at the center of the story, which is where I've spent most of my life. That's the first principle. Then there's the second, which is the net cast over my flowing perceptions, also known as aesthetics. At one time, I envied and loathed the access gay men had into that world, whereas lesbians seemed to occupy cultural space which was aesthetically null and void. I'm not sure how it changed, socially or personally. But now it seems that I just can't get out. The urge to aestheticize, to edit and invent, is my urge to think. There's inescapable falsity in my condition. If you believe what I write, watch your back. I can't stand behind any of my stories because I don't think that way. The power is in the filter. Whatever my brain dishes up as the next thought, well, it feels like me, but it's not. Who hasn't been lied to constantly? Viewed from another angle, it's a gift. I remember Pearl eyeing me after a few vodkas with the closest thing that she possessed to wickedness. You, she snapped, can write. You're like your father. I just can't. Then stalking off into the remainder of her mysterious evening. Pearl's stories pulsed with desire, fantasy, and dread. They became me. Then they blurred, disappeared. I live in the aftermath. The snag, its lingering disturbance, feels muscular. It resides there as I shove one foot ahead of the other in all the sites of pleasure and aggression, intact as my confidence. Thanks.
Oh, this, of course.
Thank you so much, Camille. That was fantastic. I love that entire world of, for lack of a better word, the new narrative. Love that word, actually. I want to introduce you to Jaime Cortez. I first met Jaime many years ago, and it was during this project called Infinite City, which was a really fantastic collaborative work, which is still extremely relevant now in so many ways. And it was a collaboration between a lot of different essayists, writers, political activists, artists, and I actually have, I still have one of these maps, which it was a co-production with the University of California Press and also the SF MoMA. And Jaime did the artwork for the chapter that was called All Identity is Local. And if you'd like to I have some of these up at the desk if you'd like to take them with you. You still have copies?
I do
have. Okay, because I can always.
I have a good archive.
Okay, great. And so Jaime was, I think you're still in Watsonville.
Yes.
But was originally from San Juan Bautista, and I think maybe it's been many years where I read one of the first stories that is in this amazing book called Gordo. I think I read the one about the Santo wrestling outfit, and so the stories have been coming through for quite a long time, and a lot of us have just been very excited because we just thought what an amazing, talented writer you were besides your other artistic endeavors. And it has taken a while for the book to come, but now the book is not only here, but it's also the major publisher with Black Cat, which is part of Grove Press. And I know you've had some great champions. Rebecca has been a really great booster of you. And now that you're sort of burst on the scene, it's kind of that thing where there's a brand new writer, but you've been doing this for for how long, right? Yeah. And but the characters in the story are just so compelling, and the settings, and a lot of it is obviously on based on your personal life. And then, so I imagine you're in that moment now where, wait, this is, people would come up and say, "Oh, I know you," and now and they're your best friend, but also, I mean, some of the characters I think I mentioned is a character named Hot Cookie.
Hot Cookie.
Yeah, and who's just amazing character. And I think if I ever met her, I'd say, "Oh, I know you," but obviously, because the stories come alive in such an amazing way that we kind of do feel like we've entered into this world, and you've allowed us into this world, and it's a world that I have to say it's, I don't want it's not a comparison at all, but I'm just kind of hoping, like I just talked to a high school student this week who was reading, I forget which one, but was reading a book by Steinbeck. And I was like, "Oh, you should read this." And they're like, "No, we're supposed to read this other." I know you're supposed to read that, but then, he's fine. But you should read this. So I'm hoping that we can see a big change in curriculum. And I think this book will just be fantastic, and every Californian should read it. And then, of course, outside of California, too. So without further ado, Jaime Cortez, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Earlier on, there was someone in here with a long-haired chihuahua in his lap, and now they're gone, and I feel cheated of the audience of a chihuahua. So I'm a little bit grieving this loss of the long-haired chihuahua in the audience. But I will remember it fondly. I would like to read without a mask on, but I won't do that if it makes anyone uncomfortable. If it makes you uncomfortable to have for me to have my mask off, just raise your hand a little bit and I'll know. Okay, thank you. I'm going to read to you from a short story That's part of this collection, Gordo, and the story is called Fandango. And I'm not starting at the beginning, so I'll just set the stage a little bit. Some of the key characters in this include Juan Diego, who is one of the garlic harvesters who's working at the camp at the time. And Juan Diego is mute. And the other kind of key characters are Los Tigres, the tigers, which are two young brothers who are also working in the camp. The character Gordo is my my avatar in this story, and he's about a fourth grade kid at this stage. And I'm going to read to you a little bit from Party Time at the Migrant Farm Worker Camp, and it's called Fandango. And it's first person in the voice of Gordo. At the worker camp, Juan Diego shares a little room with two brothers. The room is on the ground floor of the big house. The brothers are Benito and Manuel. They both look like they should be in high school, but Pa says they can barely read, even in Spanish. They always come to work at Gyrick Farms alone. No mother, no father. Everyone calls them Los Tigres because they have greenish eyes. The brothers look like indios. They're very brown with shiny white teeth and super black hair. My guess is they're about 16 or 17 years old. I'm not even 10, but I'm as tall as both of them. Los Tigres are small, but they're tough. Manuel's the older one. He lifts weights, and he has a black scar on his neck, a thick scar on his neck that looks like a fat caterpillar. Benito, the little brother, looks more normal and not so scary. Los Tigres are too old to hang out with us kids and kind of young to be with the men, so mostly they hang out with each other. But sometimes on Saturday nights, they hang out with the men. One Friday night after work, I pass their bedroom window at the big house, and I see them sleeping in their tiny bed with their shirts off. I stop and watch them. They're right next to each other, face to face. When they breathe, their chests go up and down at the exact same time. They're perfect twins, even if they're not twins. They're sleeping so hard, I wonder if they started the weekend drinking early. Los Tigres are kind of famous for being champion drinkers in the camp. That's a big deal because all the men at Gyrick Farms worker camp drink on Saturday like they've been walking through the desert all week to get to a Coors tall boy. The Saturday night drinking fandango happens all summer when the garlic and tomato harvests are happening. After dinner, the men bring broken branches, scraps of wood to the tractor barn, and they start a fire. It's not even cold in the summer. I think they just like making fires. Once the fire gets going, the guys bring chairs from their kitchen. Blue chairs, orange chairs, new chairs, ripped chairs. My pa had a big green easy chair that lives in the tractor barn under a big blue plastic sheet. Pa's chair looked like it got into a long fight with some bears. It has long rips in it, and you could see the dirty cotton sticking out. It has one broken leg, so it's kind of wobbly. But that ugly chair is my pa's throne. He loves it, and nobody else gets to sit there. When Pa goes to get his big chair, he rips off the plastic with both hands like a magician, uncovering a pretty girl. Then he drags his chair out into the circle, and he always parks it in the same spot, with his back to the wall, facing the entrance. My Tío Hector brings his little red record player and albums. He plugs the player into a long extension cord connected to another long extension cord that goes into his kitchen window. My Tío always carries his stack of records, but to be honest, he only needs to bring one, because most of the night they play one thing over and over again. Vicente Fernandez. Oh my God, it's always and forever Vicente. Vicente doing rancheras. Vicente doing boleros. Vicente shouting out the gritos. Ay. Vicente is the king of the drunk guys who are only happy when they're sad. When all the chairs are out and the record player is plugged in, they need one more thing, the most important thing, beer. Everybody brings beers, six-packs, tall boys, cases, big brown bottles like the hobos drink by the train tracks, Olympia hams, Lone Star Schlitz, and especially Coors. When one of the guys travels to Mexico, he always comes back with a big old honking bottle of Tecate or Estrella. They call the big Mexican beers caguamas, and everyone gets super excited and they pass the bottle around. The caguamas are special, I can tell, because when they drink them, they close their eyes and they look so happy, like hungry babies with baby bottles. Then they go, ah, like Tecate comes from heaven instead of dusty old Mexico. Tonight, I decide to hang out with the men while they drink. Most of the other boys in the camp don't like to. When I told my sister Sylvie I was going to the fandango, she asked, "Why are you going to hang out with those drunks? They're dangerous." "Because I want to." "This is a bad idea, bozo, but go ahead. You'll get what you get." I grab a bucket, flip it upside down. That's my throne. I sit outside the circle, almost in the dark. I stay quiet. It's nice. I like being invisible. When I try to stay for the fandango, Pa usually tells me to get out, but sometimes he lets me stay. Tonight, he lets me stay. Probably I shouldn't stay. Bad things happen at the fandango. Not every time, but a lot of the time. Some drunks are happy, some are sleepy, some are sad, some like to sing, some are angry. They're like the seven dwarfs. Everybody's different. The problem is that some of the guys get mean or they just need to fight. When they fight, it's exciting but really scary. Like when you're watching Godzilla fighting a big monster and they're knocking down buildings, stomping on buses, throwing around tanks. It makes you want to run like the people in Tokyo trying to get away from the monsters. Drunk guys are scary, and to be honest, I think the guys are kind of scary even when they're not drunk, including my pa. But you know what? I stay because the guys are really funny. Oh my God, they always have something funny to say about somebody, except my dad because he's scary, and Big Rafa because he's Big Rafa. So many jokes about El Cuantro's hairy ears and how he's really half rabbit, about Barrilito's big stomach and how he's going to have a baby. No, 2 babies, 20 pounds each, any day now. About Chuli's pretty face and his big butt and how they want to marry him instead of his sister. When Chuli stands up to get a beer, they start with the kissing noises and they sometimes pinch his butt. He says, "Why don't you go and grab your mama's ass instead?" And everyone laughs and everyone loves it. Some of these poor guys are like the chickens that get their head pecked all the time by the other chickens. Have you ever seen that? It's bad. A bunch of chickens gang up on one chicken, pecking and pecking on the head and neck and back like it's their job. After a while, the poor chicken's almost bald or even bleeding, but they never stop pecking. I once saw a big red rooster pecking and pecking at this one little chicken. The little chicken was all bunched up, squatting in the dirt with its head down, but the rooster kept on pecking and pecking like it wanted to kill the little guy. I get picked on all the time for being fat because I can't throw a ball, for speaking English all wrong. So when I saw that little chicken getting picked on, I got pretty mad at the rooster and came up behind it and kicked it as hard as I could. I got that fucker right under the ass, and he flew up like a red football, and he tried to fly, but instead he crashed on his side. The rooster stared at me, ready to attack. "How you like it when someone picks on you, fucker?" I asked the rooster. The rooster turned his head sideways, like he's thinking, and then he came running at me. I got scared and I ran, and he was right behind me. Crazy rooster! I grabbed a mop from the porch and swung it at him. Boom! I nailed him right on his side, and he rolled 2 times. He got up. He tried to flap his wings,
but only one came up. The other one didn't move. You want to fight? I asked him. I walked away. He walked away with a bad limp. Shit, I really racked him up. I feel bad. Maybe I broke something. I kept thinking if I was gonna get it, if the rooster died. I shouted at him, "Hey chicken, don't die. And next time don't be a bully." So the men start drinking. After a couple of beers, Juan Diego leaves the circle, and in a moment he returns with a big square bottle in his hand. He holds his bottle above his head and waves it around like a trophy. Everyone gets really excited, and they're calling his name. Chulis and Cuatro even make excited monkey noises. Monte Azul, my favorite, says Cuatro. Today we drink like kings. Juan Diego smiles, opens the bottle, takes a big drink, and passes it around. Everyone does the same, and they're so excited to be drinking this. They close their eyes and take a big drinks, and then they let out air and they shake their heads like they can't believe it's so good. Wow, it must be so good. The bottle gets back to Juan Diego, and he stands up and brings the bottle to me, and he points at my chest, and he pretends to drink from the bottle. You want me to drink? I ask him. He shakes his head. Everybody starts laughing. I'm laughing too, like it's a big joke, but he keeps holding the bottle in front of me. I look at my dad because I don't know what to do, and my dad nods his head a little, telling me, take a drink. Okay, I will. I take the bottle and I look at Baga, and he's nodding and smiling. His eyes are shining. Everybody's quiet now. I grab the bottle with both hands, hold it up to my mouth, take a big gulping drink, and then two more. Juan Diego grabs the bottle from my hands and some tequila spills on my shirt. Everybody's laughing and cheering. Some of the guys are standing and jumping up and down and pointing at me. That's my gordo! Caramba, un tequilero campeón, they say. When they see my face all scrunched up from the bad flavor of the tequila, they laugh some more. It tasted awful, but now everybody likes me. For once, all the guys like me. They joke and they joke about my drinking, and it makes me feel good. I move my chair closer to the fire. Cuatro makes room and tells me to sit next to him. So I do. He puts one arm around me. This is really nice. I'm in the circle now. The guys drink some more. They get louder and funnier and scarier. I think I'm a little drunk too because I'm giggling and giggling. I can't stop. Then Tío Héctor gets up and flips the Vicente Fernandez record on the record player. All the guys start singing along to Volver, Volver, with their arms around each other, shouting gritos into the air. Louder and louder they sing the sad song about wanting to go back, back, back to her arms. I look and see that Juan Diego is crying. His face looks like he just broke a leg or something. It's the saddest crying I ever seen because Juan Diego don't make no noise. Only a sound of air, only a sound like air coming out of a small hole in a tire. Oh my God, I never seen a man cry so much. I feel myself start crying. I wipe my eyes because I don't want them to see me crying, but it doesn't matter anymore because everyone stopped singing and drinking. They're looking at Juan Diego. Somebody asked the group, what's wrong with him? Tío Héctor gets up, goes to Juan Diego, crouches down, looks him in the face, puts his hands on his shoulders. What's the matter, Juan Diego? Juan Diego tries to tell the story of the tears with his hands. His hands begin to move all over the place. Sometimes they look like a little man climbing upstairs, a bottle rocket flying up and exploding, a butterfly in the wind, a claw cutting him across the cheek. Juan Diego looks up and he sees everyone is quiet and confused. Juan Diego starts punching his own heart. Boom, boom, boom. He hits himself harder and harder like he wants to crack open his chest and take out his sad heart. Tío Hector grabs Juan Diego's hand to stop him from hitting himself. Juan Diego's so damn strong he keeps hitting himself. Then my tío grabs him with both hands and makes him stop. He puts his face right up to Juan Diego's like he's gonna kiss him, but he doesn't. Instead, he talks to him real slow. It's okay, amigo mío. You can cry, but don't hurt yourself. Whatever happened, it's done. Juan Diego looks down. He opens his fist and stares into his hand. He puts his hand on his heart and begins moving his mouth like he's singing along with Vicente, but with no voice. He tries to stop crying, but it comes out again like a hiccup. Juan Diego looks down at the dirt, and his shoulders go up and down. Let it out, says Chulis. He's crying too now. Llórala, Juan Diego. Llórala, I think. How does Chulis know that Juan Diego's crying for a girl and not something else? Juan Diego calms down. He sits up and takes a big drink from the Monte Azul bottle. Are you in love, Juan Diego? asks Chulis. Juan Diego looks at him and shakes his head no. You okay then? asks Chulis. Juan Diego lifts his thumbs into the air to show that he's okay now. He grabs the bottle of Monte Azul and drinks the rest in 3 gulps. And he burps. Everybody laughs. He laughs. Everyone starts drinking and talking again. Suddenly, it's like we're all okay. I guess nothing happened. That's enough sad song, says Tío Hector. He walks over to the record player and says, now let's have a party. He looks through the stack and takes out an album. It's KC and the Sunshine Band. He starts playing Get Down Tonight. Yes, I love that song. Some of the older dudes aren't too excited, but I am, and so are Los Tigres. They're smiling with their eyes almost closed from drinking, and they're moving their heads back and forth and loving it. Benito, the little tigre, stands up and starts moving his feet. Then he leaves the circle and he starts dancing. He's really good, and every step matches the music. Benito pretends to be dancing with a girl, holding her by the waist, kicking up all kinds of dust in the dirt with his feet. Disco at Gyrick Farms. He turns around and shakes his butt at everybody, and they love it so much, and they start laughing. Some of the guys stand up and start clapping. Then Manuel, the other tigre, stands up. At first, I think he's going to dance too. I'm thinking it's going to be great. But no, it's something else. Manuel looks really mad and he goes to his little brother. You call that dancing? Shouts Manuel. You can't disco, puto. I'll teach you. I tried to teach you, but you can't disco. Benito don't care. He keeps on dancing. Then Manuel starts dancing, and oh my God, he's really bad at it. He can't get down tonight or any other night. He pumps his arms like he's weightlifting. He thinks he's so cool, but everybody's laughing like it's a big joke. Manuel's face looks angry. He looks again at his little brother. Benito's so smooth, so cool. He looks like he's dancing on Soul Train. Manuel's eyebrows get all mean like a bad guy in the comic book, and suddenly he runs and tackles little Benito. They both hit the dirt. Manuel is swinging and swinging, nailing his little brother on the shoulders, the neck, the face. It's wild monkey fighting. I stand up to watch and it makes me dizzy. I see Benito get out from underneath Manuel. He stands and faces Manuel. They're breathing hard and everyone's telling them, stop fighting, settle down. But Manuel can't stop. He grabs Benito by the shirt, pulls him down to the ground. Manuel swoops down to punch Benito in the face. But Benito kicks up at him. Boom. Benito's kick is perfect. He nails his big brother right under the chin with the work boot. Oh man, I can hear Manuel's mouth snap shut and his head pops back and he lands face up in the dirt. My boss says, son of a bitch, really loud, and everyone gets real quiet. I go over to Manuel and like a dummy, I ask if he's okay. The guys circle around Manuel. He opens his mouth, and inside It's like a cup of blood. He spits it all out and pokes his finger in his mouth. Our tongue, he says. He can't talk right. Benito gets on his knees next to Manuel, takes off his T-shirt, and gives it to his big brother. Press it against your mouth, says Benito. Manuel takes the shirt and does that. Benito looks down and his hands shake. He starts crying. Then Manuel starts crying and they hug hard. The blood is all over both their faces, necks, chest. One of them keeps saying, forgive me, forgive me. But it's hard to tell if it's Benito or Manuel. So that was an excerpt from Fandango. Testing, testing.
Yeah, I guess that's good. Yeah.
Hello, hello. Okay. So we're gonna just talk a little bit together here, Camille. Um, I've started reading the book. I have not finished it, but I did start it, and I'm completely kind of enthralled. Something that's really interesting to me, because it's so different from how I think and write, is that I think you have this really fascinating, riveting way of not saying things, which is, for me, really interesting, because I'm trying in writing often to create almost a cinematic experience for the reader where everything can be pictured. And it's like a lot of concreteness, which is not a word, but it should be. um, but I think you have this beautiful thing about not saying it all the time. Can you? I'd love to hear how you think about that and how that works in the way that you write.
I think that writing for me is like a struggle. Was a struggle to understand all the silences and strange stories and sort of blocks and all these things that I just grew up with. And in order to tell the story, I couldn't just tell the story, but I could sort of like feel the story. So the stories are there a lot through the senses, a lot through the communicating the feeling and the momentum of that searching. So, and then you eventually do get to it. You do get to all the sort of scariest parts, but almost when you're looking over your shoulder, it's not like it's so super directed to that point, but you do get there. And does that make sense? Yeah. I mean, one thing, I'm in the middle of your book also, but one thing I really related to you about in your book was I felt the deep love of the characters in the community. Like I felt like it really, and I really related to that. Like I felt like some of the characters that I try to bring to the page and stuff, it's like I have to really love them to give them a place on the page. I'm wondering if you have a response to that.
I think that, like you, the characters are in so many ways based on people who were in my family and who I knew growing up. And some of them are composites of different people I knew growing up. So I feel, even though it's not directly those people, I just feel a lot of responsibility to that portrayal of these characters. I also just feel like the richness for me and is just in the idea that my stories are full of people who do and say really awful things sometimes, but that's not the same as being a villain. And I have no interest in villainy, but I am very interested
in that fullness of how we are together. So, in that excerpt I just read, these boys just got into this horrible fight that ended up with a real nasty injury, and they're a puddle of tears with each other at the end, because it's just, that's the complexity of things, is that you can be that person who does the terrible thing, and also the person who loves. So I want to get at that fullness, and I think love is a really important thing, and I do feel like I love these characters, and they are. I think sometimes there's a way that characters can become symbolic. They can be a stand-in for an idea, and other times they can be more kind of individuated and feel like a very specific person. I like the idea of trying to straddle that and have them have a couple of different functions, both their own individual characteristics and the way that they symbolically are standing in for something. But how did you think about love and the love of the characters?
Just to try to do the work of trying to bring them to the page, their style, their jokes, the kind of the spirit with which they approach their lives, and that the way they survive their lives, because sometimes it's really admirable that they do survive their lives. And yeah, and it's interesting. Like one thing that happened in the aftermath of the book is I started to some conversation started up with some people from one of those old communities, and I discovered that one of the characters had passed away, and passed away young, and I felt like so excited in a way that I just had put this person like in their sexy prime, like in their community, in their space, that I'd put them in my book and they were still there, and they were that their presence was brought to life. I think that I've always heard that about fiction, but it was never real to me until I kind of stumbled into finding that actually happen. But it really is the case. Like, your community that you write about there is now present. It's not going to be ravaged by time the way that communities always are. It has its integrity and its liveliness that have been that are like a gift to, and that's, like, does everybody know that? Did I somehow just not get that? But I think it's really, it was great to discover that and have that experience.
I love what you said about they won't be ravaged by time now. They're kind of preserved, like flies in amber or something,
Right.
through the storytelling process. I've been thinking about these short stories, and these are more than 40 years ago now. This is now history, and about thinking about the moment that is represented in this book. This was for instance, at the very tail end of a certain kind of relationship that ranchers and laborers used to have, where the ranchers would provide free or very low-cost housing to certain key workers and families who they wanted to have year-round. There would always be an influx of people during the harvest season, but there's also stuff that has to happen all winter long. Soil needs to be prepared, trees need to be pruned, things need to be planted, all of that needs to happen. And so some of the laborers had to be retained year-round. And that relationship in agriculture no longer exists that way, not to my knowledge anyways. So that was the tail end of that. In just a few years after that period that I grew up knowing that as the reality, it stopped being a reality. You just don't see it that much. Or things like, in the story I talk about children laboring in agriculture, and in numbers, like, especially on the weekends during the busy seasons, potato harvesting or garlic harvesting. Kids were everywhere, little tiny, pre-kindergarten kids, K through 6 kids. It was full of that. and that has also disappeared from the landscape. I'm I'm actually glad I got to experience that for a variety of reasons. But I know that that's, I'm not saying it's something I would recommend for anybody. But I'm glad I experienced it, because you learn a lot when you have that experience. So
Yeah.
that history piece. One of the things I think that's also kind of connects these works is the fragility and vulnerability of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really struck by that. And as I was reading through it, I kept thinking, oh, these people are so vulnerable. Like, terrible things could happen at any moment, it feels like, because there's so much risk that's happening,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's risk of violence or abuse or just emotional kind of risk. And I just feel like you do that a lot with the characters, is that they feel like they're in a soup of risk, if you will.
I actually want to really celebrate the wit and vividness that they bring to those situations. It's so, I think there's people feel radical if they even write about those things with a kind of focus on the truth being this difficult truth, and how, I don't know, it's often, I support all that kind of stuff politically and all of that, but I really like to focus on, the style, the sexiness, the humor that's a part of the survival, and especially is part of a survival in a community. I think that when people are all by themselves, they lose a lot of that. And, but it is possible to be a part of a subcultural community and really survive with so much, survive your difficulties with some pizzazz, and I like that. I actually, and one reason why I'm into celebrating that also is that I think that we've kind of let social media strip a bunch of that away. I think that people are not as present to each other physically as used to be the case, and I think that actually makes people weaker. There've been studies and stuff that say that depression goes up and anxiety goes up and all these things get worse. And I wonder if it's because of the lack of this kind of community experience that kind of takes people through. And now everybody looks on Instagram and sees how everybody else is prettier than they are. It's not. You know what I mean? It's
Well, and I think also, having heard you say that, Camille, is the kind of cultural tolerance for risk, especially for kids, it's so different than it used to be. I cannot count how many times my sister and I rode in the back seat with a drunk person at the wheel. It was just, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I understand, but I'm just telling you that it was so. The risk level that was normalized was so different. I remember being in the backseat of the car, Dad drunk like a motherfucker in the front seat, driving us home. The town sheriff, Lonnie Hurlbutt, he pulls us over. Lonnie comes to the door. He kind of sticks his head in the window, and he says to me, my dad says, "Felipe, what are you doing?" And my dad was like, "Oh, I'm trying to get home." And he goes, "Well, you're weaving all over the road." He's from Oklahoma. And my dad says, "Oh, okay, yeah." And he goes, "Go home, Felipe, stop drinking." And that was it. That was the extent of what happened when in that moment. My dad was really hammered, right? But I laugh at it now. I do find it actually quite funny that we had so completely normalized what now would be seen as absolutely irresponsible, horrible behavior that you should take your kids away for, So it's just
I totally relate to that. I had so much fun. I had so many crazy adventures, and nobody cared. And if there's one thing I really appreciate about growing up in that era, it was the fact that we were almost thrown out of the house in a way.
Yes, and, it was a lot of that. Get out of here. Get out. Don't come back till it gets dark.
Exactly. That was the line.
Thing, right?
Don't come back till it gets dark.
And of course you burned yourself. And of course you stabbed yourself. It just, all this shit would happen. And yeah, if you're going to play Superman and jump off the roof of the house, shit happens. And it was just such a different mindset, right? And I feel that in there, like it was a really different risk tolerance at work. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I'll say that.
No, I know. God, that was the best part. I mean, it was scary at times, but
I'm wondering if anyone in the audience has questions or comments or anything to share.
I'm thinking from what you're both saying that I think at the start of Camille's afterword, there is this kind of reflection on a kind of joy at that the world that is gone is not here, in some sense, you know? Yeah. And it's a complex reflection. It isn't nostalgia. It isn't, but it's a joy at one's past life, at what one has been exposed to.
Yeah. Yeah. That intensity of it.
I
Yeah, you're asking a really meaty, excellent question.
That's like a couple semesters worth of
Yes. No,
but it's
this
a
is
good
good.
question, yeah.
I'm sorry. Let me think how to restate it. Would you like to restate it again, just for the people? Great. So how to balance the kind of reality of what we remember happened with the fictionalization piece? I would say a couple of things. One of them is just for my stories. I would say my book is probably about 80% autobiographical, and then the rest of it is add-ons and fabrication. So it's heavily biographical in my case, but I think that part of that question that was really interesting and challenging for me was deciding how much do I really want to share about this history, this family history, and in particular the things I say about my mother and father characters who are based on my own mother and father, and having to really make choices and asking myself questions like, who are you trying to protect and why? And so those questions were helpful guiding questions to me. And at a certain point, because I'm a great admirer of David Wojnarowicz and Dorothy Allison, who to me felt like they were willing to go there into the darkest, most abyssal kind of experiences. I was a great admirer of the way they told stories of their life. But I realized I don't have to go there. I don't have to go there. We get to choose at every moment how far and how deep we want to go into these really dark places. I knew that I needed my book to have this certain balance of the horror of things, but also just that I wanted it to be fun and I wanted it to be funny. So I made choices about what does and doesn't get included. So those are just a couple thoughts.
Yeah, it's good. I think for me, I think that there's a long process of becoming able to really work with the material, and there's a lot of issues of skill which also take a lot of time. But but there's the issue of being able to work with the material. And for me, that partly means going to the point where you're not, you are no longer sort of captured by your own resentments, and that you can see with some genuine sympathy, the lives of people who may have caused you to suffer, and to even see like their humor and their, and that's something that's going to be different for everybody, but it has to do. You can recognize it through whether your imagination is sort of narrowing and getting repetitive, or whether it's open and kind of curious. If it's narrowing and getting repetitive, that is a sign that you're getting captured by resentments. And if it's open and curious, then it's going to work better as writing. So, I mean, the truth about this process is that there's nothing about it which is fast. It's actually, it takes a lot of, it's really not just a process of sitting down and writing. It's a process of kind of digesting your life and what you know about your life. And there's honestly no telling how long it's going to take. And the other thing is that you're lucky to even be able to do it at all. And sometimes just even showing up for that process is enough. So, yeah.
I would add one more thought. I mean, it's such a great question. As Camille said, we could probably go on for forever on this topic. But one other thought that I think was kind of a powerful one, and it's a bit of a mantra for me now, is when we are working with our personal narratives and our personal histories, is to go back to those stories and ask what really happened. What was really going on? Because what I realized was that from our family and from my age peers, we, you know how stories become family legend, right? And attached to that is a family interpretation of what it meant. And to go back to those stories and say, what was really going on? What was motivating this? Why did this play out this way? And you start to uncover some really amazing stuff. And those stories that are so familiar and that you feel like you've known them all your life, you realize you haven't known them all your life. You haven't. Not yet. Not till you ask, what really happened? Why did that happen? So that's just one final thing.
Yeah, any questions, please come to the front.
I want to follow up with one of Jaime's questions to Camille. And I thought it was really interesting, your question about how you're a master of not saying something or just sliding right behind it. And I wouldn't exactly agree with that. I think you say things, but in figures of speech that are so, like, I have no idea where that's coming from. And it's perfect. It just makes complete sort of dazzling sense somewhere back there. And I wonder if that's a product of inspiration or if it's a product of many hours of working it.
I think that I have a bunch of different processes. One of the processes I have is to let my thoughts just really like dissolve and kind of get, surreal or out there, no longer makes sense. I can just sort of depart from sense completely. And I can write like that for a while. And then the task becomes a task of integration. So I think the ways I end up working with that material and integrating it. So there is some way that I let it to go to a place of being kind of all senses and no sense, being, And then I can work with that as kind of a raw material and shape it and sort of bring it back into something that's meaningful. So there's some kind of internal tension from when I've let it go astray into almost like the kooky place, and then I bring it back, and that I think is I think that's something that is happening in the sentences. But I also think it kind of happens in the characters. Like it probably comes to some extent from growing up with my mother's wacky stories. And I would follow them and follow them and follow them. And all of a sudden I would feel like I was suspended in space, 45 feet above the ground, and what was going to happen next, and just like, it kind of, so I grew up with a certain kind of language, and I think that, I think that some of what we use as language really comes from, family experience and all of its different challenges.
Thanks. So this one's for Jaime. I was curious about your process, especially during writing this book. The excerpt you read was in the mind of the 4-year-old. So I'm bored of those. So I'm really interested on how you wrote that and the process. Did you ever doubt yourself? I doubt myself trying to write good. So that's just
Yeah, I think confidence is really ugly and overrated. So I commend your doubt. I'm not impressed by confidence at all, really. I like neurotic, fucked up, I don't know what I'm doing kind of people. Those are my people. So I'll just say that about confidence. And it's also not sexy. So I'll just say that. But I think a couple of things. Let me see. Can you ask your question again, please? I'm sorry.
what was your process writing for adults, especially in the 4-year-old?
Oh yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So in the excerpt I just read, it was in the voice of a 4th grader, and I think that one of the really interesting kind of writer challenges of the Gordo stories, especially the ones that focus on the boy, is I don't want to use my child characters like a ventriloquist dummy to communicate my adult perspectives. So that's that would be a fail. And you know it when you see it, and it's really common, right? You see people writing a kid voice, and you're like, no, I don't buy it. So the question is, how do I evacuate my adult perspective and understanding out of that? And how do I tap back into that younger mind? And it was a really interesting challenge to me, asking, here you have a kid who's perceptive and bright, but also just doesn't understand the world because he's just a kid. They're literally ignorant, right? They are ignorant of how things work and why people do what they do. And so then the question becomes, what are the poetics of a kid trying to make meaning of an incomprehensible world? What are the metaphors that a kid might dream up to try to make some sense of what they're seeing? That's, to me, the challenge. And if we can meet that challenge, then we get, that's where I think the strongest kid voices come from. And the more common thing is, I think, for people end up failing to get there. And they use the children to communicate their adult intentions, ideas, perspectives. So that was certainly something that was important for me to get that voice. I needed to try to go back there and try to think, what are the poetics of a kid? What are the metaphors of a kid? It helps to spend a bit of time around little kids if you can, who are roughly the age range, and you can start to see how they make meaning. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, our authors, and thank you to the audience. Yay! And please support the book, the books. You know what that means.